Yes, let's talk about hockey, the show that journeys through the history of the sport of ice hockey from its disputed origins to the game we see today. Continuing our look at the four former WHA teams that joined the NHL after the 7-year battle between the two leagues ended with their merger in 1979, we come to the franchise that was awarded to Ben Hatskin, a Manitoba businessman, and named after a local Winnipeg junior team from the Western Canada Hockey League, the Jets.
Easily one of the best teams in the WHA's 7-year history, the Winnipeg Jets grabbed 2 division titles and 1 league title in the regular season, made it to the Avco Cup finals 6 times in 7 years, and won the Avco Cup 3 times, 2 of which were in the WHA's final 2 seasons before the merger. Unfortunately, like all of the other former WHA clubs, the Jets had to give up a good portion of their talent, including 3 of their top scorers in a dispersal draft to the NHL teams that held their rights. Additionally, they were also given a low pick in the first round of the 1979 entry draft. Though Winnipeg was able to reacquire Bobby Hull from Chicago in the expansion draft that followed the dispersal draft, Hull would only play 18 games for the Jets before they dealt him to Hartford for future considerations. Winnipeg's first game in the NHL was on October 10, 1979, and would end in a 4-2 loss to the Pittsburgh Penguins. Unfortunately, things would not get better for the Jets anytime soon. With their championship roster from the team's WHA years torn apart, Winnipeg finished dead last in the league during their first 2 years in the NHL, which included a horrendous 9-win season in 1980-81 that still ranks as the worst in the club's history. Prior to the start of the 1981-82 season, the NHL realigned the divisions to reduce travel costs, a decision which moved Winnipeg from the Smythe Division to the Norris Division. Aside from the Jets' divisional move, former Canucks assistant coach Tom Watt was brought on as the team's new head coach. Former 1980 Team USA defenseman Dave Christian was named team captain, and the club drafted Cornwall Royals center Dale Hawerchuk first overall in the entry draft. Additionally, the Jets picked up winger Paul McLean from the St. Louis Blues and defenseman Serge Savard from the Montreal Canadiens. Bolstered by these additions, the Jets went from a 9-win record from the previous year to a 33-win record, finishing second in the Norris Division to make the playoffs for the first time since joining the NHL. Entering their opening series against the St. Louis Blues, the team split the first 2 games in Winnipeg before the Blues outscored the Jets 14-5 over the next 2 games in St. Louis to win the series 3-1.
When the Colorado Rockies club moved to New Jersey prior to the 1982-83 season, the NHL again underwent a realignment which shifted Winnipeg from the Norris Division back to the Smythe Division. The Jets' performance dropped a bit over the 2 seasons following the divisional move, but their 4th-place divisional rankings over these 2 years still earned them entry into the playoffs. Unfortunately, they were swept by the high-powered Edmonton Oilers in the first round both years.
Coming off these consecutive playoff disappointments, the Jets put together their club's best NHL season in 1984-85. With 6 different players tallying 30 or more goals during the year, and goaltender Brian Hayward's 33 wins ranking as the second best total in the league, Winnipeg finished with the second best record in their division and conference behind only the Oilers. Entering the playoffs, Winnipeg this time squared off against the other team from Alberta, the Calgary Flames. The Jets took the first 2 games in Winnipeg and looked to sweep the Flames as the series moved to Calgary. However, the Flames put up a defiant 4-0 shutout performance in Game 3 to extend the series. Motivated by the loss of team captain Dale Hawerchuk, who was out for the remainder of the playoffs after being injured by defenseman Jamie McCowan in Game 3, the Jets rebounded in Game 4 with a 5-3 victory to win a playoff series for the first time in the NHL. Unfortunately, in the Smythe Division Finals, Winnipeg again ran afoul of Edmonton and were outscored 22-11 as the Oilers swept them for a 3rd year in a row. Despite coming off their best year while in the NHL, the Jets followed it up with a subpar performance in the 1985-86 season, racking up only 59 points in the standings. Luckily, this was still enough to sneak into the playoffs, where they again met the Calgary Flames in the first round. Unlike the previous year, Calgary dominated Winnipeg, forcing the Jets to cycle through 4 different goaltenders over what would ultimately be a 3-game sweep in favor of the Flames. The Jets rebounded in the 1986-87 season behind their rookie goaltending duo of Pokey Reddick and Daniel Berthiaume, who were affectionately named Pokey and the Bandit, to finish third in their division with 88 points, which was a 29-point increase from the previous year. Entering the playoffs, Winnipeg faced Calgary for the 3rd year in a row. Despite the Calgary crowd's Sea of Red tactic, the Jets took the first 2 games of the series in Calgary by 4-2 and 3-2 scores. In response to Calgary's Sea of Red, the Jets fans were asked to wear white clothing to the home games to create an intimidating atmosphere for the opposing team. Though the Winnipeg Whiteout did not quite work in Game 3, as the Flames won 3-2 in overtime, the Jets won their next 2 home games by 4-3 and 6-1 scores to take the series in 6 games and advance to the second round. From then on after this series, Winnipeg fans wore white for every home playoff game.
Unfortunately, in the second round, Winnipeg faced Edmonton for the 4th time in 5 years, and like the previous 3 series, they were swept by the Oilers. Over the next 2 seasons, the Jets would fall into a slump, getting eliminated by Edmonton in the first round once again in the 1988 playoffs, and then falling 10 points short of a playoff spot the following year, ending their 7-year playoff streak. After a dismal 1988-89 season, the Jets named former Blackhawks coach Bob Murdoch as their new head coach for the 1989-90 season. Underneath Murdoch and behind the offense of Dale Hawerchuk and Pat Elenick, as well as the goaltending of Bob Essenza, Winnipeg returned to respectability with a 37-32-11 record.
This landed them back in the playoffs to once again face the Edmonton Oilers. Unlike the previous playoff matches against the Oilers, Winnipeg grabbed a 2-1 series lead after taking Game 1 in Edmonton by a 7-5 score and then Game 3 back in Winnipeg by a 2-1 score. Game 4 would be a double overtime nail-biter, but thanks to Dave Ellett's goal, the Jets roared to a 3-1 series lead and looked to finally win a series against Edmonton. Unfortunately, things unraveled for Winnipeg after that, as the Oilers won the next 3 games to eliminate the Jets yet again. After this postseason collapse, the disillusioned Jets traded longtime star Dale Hawerchuk to Buffalo for defenseman Phil Housley, forwards Scott Arniel and Jeff Parker, and a first-round draft pick. Unfortunately, even though Phil Housley led the team in scoring, Winnipeg's 9-game winless streak in late November and early December, and their 3-9-0 record in March in the 1990-91 season landed them 2 points shy of a playoff spot. In the 1991-92 season, thanks to Phil Housley, Eddie Olchuk, Pat Elenick, and Frederick Olsson's offensive numbers, and Bob Essenza ranking amongst the league's top 5 goaltenders, Winnipeg made it back into the top 4 teams of their division to secure a playoff spot. Their opponent for the first round was their division's top team, the Vancouver Canucks. The Jets, though, shocked many in the first 4 games of the series by establishing a 3-1 series lead. But, just like the Edmonton series 2 years earlier, Vancouver stormed back in the next 3 games, outscoring the Jets 21-5 and winning the series in 7 games. For the 1992-93 season, Winnipeg debuted their first-round pick from the 1988 draft, Finnish winger Teemu Selanne. The Jets didn't have to wait long for Selanne to live up to his potential either, as he netted 11 goals in his first 12 games and went on to break the NHL record for goals scored by a rookie by tallying a league-leading 76 goals. Though this helped lift Winnipeg into the playoffs and earn Selanne the Calder Trophy for Rookie of the Year, the Jets still suffered a first-round elimination at the hands of the Vancouver Canucks for a second consecutive year.
In the 1993-94 season, the NHL realigned its teams once again, and Winnipeg found themselves in the Central Division. Unfortunately, thanks to a severed Achilles tendon, Selanne missed 33 games of this season, and though the Jets had standout performances by Keith Tkachuk, Nelson Emerson, and Alexei Zhemnov, they still dropped to dead last in their conference. Though they improved over this slightly the next year, they still fell short and missed the playoffs in consecutive years for the first time since their club's first 2 seasons in the NHL.
During this time, increasing salaries, the demand by some players to be paid in US dollars, which at the time equated to $1.40 Canadian, and the fact that Winnipeg was the league's smallest market after the Quebec Nordiques moved to Colorado, put a huge strain on the Jets franchise. Despite strong fan support, the Winnipeg Jets were at a financial disadvantage with many American franchises. After an 11th hour effort by a team of local businessmen dubbed the Spirit of Manitoba fell through, team owner Barry Schenkaro sold the team to an American business group intent on relocating the franchise. Back on the ice, the Jets finished ranked 5th in their division and just barely managed to beat out the Anaheim Mighty Ducks for the final playoff spot in the Western Conference for the 1996 playoffs. This matched them against the best team in the league that year, the Detroit Red Wings. Winnipeg was outscored by Detroit 8-1 over the first 2 games, but when the Jets returned home for Game 3, Keith Tkachuk, Eddie Olczyk, and Craig Janney turned out multiple point performances for a 4-1 win to cut Detroit's lead in the series. The Red Wings would again dominate the Jets in Game 4 by a 6-1 score, but in Game 5, Winnipeg's second-year netminder Nikolai Khabibulin stopped 51 shots to keep the Jets alive with the 3-1 victory. Unfortunately, Game 6 back in Winnipeg on April 28, 1996 would end up being the final game for the Jets as Detroit beat them 4-1 with Norm McIver netting the lone Jets goal. After that, the Jets were relocated to Glendale, Arizona and renamed the Phoenix Coyotes for the 1996-97 season. However, the club's luck hasn't improved much since the move to Arizona, as over the years they've not only faced bankruptcy, but were also unable to win a playoff series until their run to the Western Conference Finals in 2012. However, back in Winnipeg, the NHL finally returned to the city in 2011 when the Atlanta Thrashers club was moved there and renamed the Jets. Now hockey fans in Manitoba can once again deck themselves out in white and root for their Jets.